Welcome everyone. My name is Jeff Smith. I'm a product manager here at Oracle. I'm on the database team. There's quite a few of us on the database team, so the group that I'm a part of is Database Tools under Vice President Mike Hitchwa, and my team specifically handles Oracle SQL Developer, Oracle SQL Developer Data Modeler, SQLcl, Oracle REST Data Services. We also build the VirtualBox appliance you may download on OTN, and we help out with lots and lots of other things, including the Oracle Cloud, of course. Today's session, I'll be talking about Oracle SQL Developer. My contact information is here on the screen. Feel free to email me. Feel free to tweet me. Feel free to leave messages on my blog. And this is being recorded for YouTube, so feel free to leave comments and do your thumbs up there as well if you like this. The database team is looking to do more outreach to developers and just all of our users, and the advocacy team is working on setting up a formal structure to provide these kind of hours where folks can just interact with product managers. So if you like this, if you have feedback on how this went, please share that with us, so we can use that to make that program even more beneficial. So for an hour today, I'll be covering SQL Developer. The same time next week, I'll be covering Oracle SQLcl, which is our command line interface for the database. And the week after that, so 2 weeks from today, I'll be covering Oracle REST Data Services. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat. If you really want to, you can unmute yourself and ask the question that way. This is being recorded, of course. Now, if you've ever seen me do a SQL Developer presentation before, I usually do lots and lots of tips and tricks. So this is going to be more of an overview of the product. So it's going to be more of a collection of great dance songs versus a saucer full of secrets, if you know what I mean. So this is going to be more about what the product is, how to get started with it, what the base features are. So I'm going to assume you've never seen the product before. I will try to throw in a few tips and tricks there for the loyal users that are here just to support me, which of course, as always, thank you. The version of SQL Developer I will be presenting is version 17.2. And if version 17.2 sounds drastically different than what you're used to, I'll explain that in a moment. But that's the current version available for download on the Oracle Technology Network. And the easiest way to go find SQL Developer is simply, apart from Google, of course, you can just type oracle.com/SQL Developer, and that's bookmarked to the official product page. And you can come here and click the download button. You need a Oracle single sign-on account, completely free. You can use an anonymous versus a corporate email to set that up. It takes about 7 minutes to go through all the point and clicks, and then once you've done that, it only takes about 5 minutes to download and install and start using SQL Developer. So what do you need to use SQL Developer? Well, you need a computer. You need Java, and for Java, I mean the development kit. And you need a machine that will support Java. So for 90% of us out there, maybe even 92% of us out there, that's going to be Windows. I personally have a Windows 7 machine and a Windows 10 machine. SQL Developer runs just fine on both of those platforms. And if you don't want to have to worry about the Java requirement, or if you've got a corporate infrastructure that doesn't allow you to do things like installing Java because it might interrupt or affect other products. Oops. Let me turn on my fancy zoom tool. Zoom it, that is, which is hidden somewhere. There we go. And yeah. So if you're on Windows and you're not sure if you have the right Java, grab this one. So this download's a little bit larger, but it has the SQL Developer product in it, and embedded in that folder is Java 8 JDK. It doesn't get installed on your machine. It doesn't touch your path or your registry. It won't touch other applications on your machine that may or may not need Java. But what it does do is it allows SQL Developer to run with that Java home inside of itself. So 0 admin privs necessary. Now we do just embed a 64-bit copy of the JDK, so if you're on an older machine that's 32-bit, you're going to have to go get your own. For the Mac and Linux users out there, most Macs will already have Java 8 on it. If not, you can just go, I think, type Java, and it'll go get that for you. Linux, you could use yum or however RPM methods you'd like to go grab that, but I'm assuming if you're on Linux, you're pretty savvy already and don't need help with the Java bits. Now, I always call SQL Developer free, but technically it's included with your database license. So what that means is I'm never going to ask you for money for SQL Developer, although if you do hear me asking for money, things are very bad. Hopefully we don't start doing that. No, we'll never ask for money for SQL Developer. You've already paid for it. So when you pay for the database, SQL Developer is part of the database. If you were to go into an Oracle home where your database is running and CD to that, there will be a SQL Developer folder in there. It's also included with the Oracle clients that you might download. The full clients, not the instant clients, I think. Of course, it's also available as a separate download on OTN, which I showed you earlier. But really, the brass tacks of it is if you're paying for maintenance or you have a support contract on your database, you do have access to my Oracle support for SQL Developer. So you can open a service request and log enhancement requests and report the occasional bugs that you might stumble onto. Now, if you are in an environment where the version of your database is not licensed, maybe you're using Express Edition, maybe you're using a personal edition, or you have a database and the support has lapsed, you can still use SQL Developer free. Your Oracle Technology Network license covers you, and if you want support, instead of having a formal support mechanism, you will have all of these fun places to go to. So we have the Oracle Technology Network with the forums, and our team spends a lot of time hanging out at places like Stack Overflow. We produce content for YouTube. We're fairly active on Twitter and Facebook. So if you need help, you're a quick Google away, and hopefully we have answers and help for you in the medium that you're looking for, whether it be a Q&A, a video, a screenshot, all of that good stuff. I want to go back a slide. Yep. So SQL Developer, I would say it's fairly close to ubiquitous, which is just a fancy word for saying it's everywhere. Almost every client that I work with has some folks using SQL Developer. Now, it might not be exclusively using SQL Developer, but it's fairly easy to find, especially since it ships with the database itself. It is one of the most popular downloads on all of OTN. I think it trades places with Java and the database itself in the top 15 fairly regularly. And we have around 5 million users worldwide using the tool. I don't say this to beat our chest, although I kind of like to do that anyway. I say this to say if you do take the time to learn the tool and you go to apply for a job, odds are those skills will not be wasted. You'll be able to use the product pretty much any shop that you go to. Or if you're looking to hire folks, you don't need to spend a lot of money training folks for third-party tools when most Oracle professionals out there, they've not used SQL Developer before. They're pretty familiar with it. And the nice thing as well is we can save you lots and lots and lots of money. There are third-party tools out there that cost upwards of $5,000 a seat, and we're free. And most of the customers I've spoken to have been able to do everything they've ever wanted to do, and if not more so, with the tool. And if you need help making a switch to using SQL Developer for your corporation or your group or your nonprofit or whatever, feel free to reach out to me, and I offer free training on how to do that on a pretty regular basis. So version 17.2 came out just this past few months. What we had for years and years, going back more than a decade, was a release cycle where once a year, maybe sometimes twice, we would have a major release followed by several patches, and we would have early adopter kind of beta or trial periods where you could provide feedback on the big stuff that we were building. And this worked quite well for us. The last release under that methodology was version 4.2, which really just came out spring of 2017. So if you're on a version of SQL Developer that doesn't start with the number 4, I highly, highly recommend you go upgrade immediately. And if you're not on 4.2, I would try to get to that version at least. Now what we've done since the spring is we've moved to a quarterly release cycle. So the idea is every 3 months, expect an update on our tools. And instead of delivering big, huge features once a year, there'll be more incremental updates and, of course, bug fixes. And I think the customers will win. Now, you might have to worry about how often you want to upgrade, but if there's a critical fix you're waiting for, or if there's a database feature that's been introduced recently, you're not going to have to wait a whole year for it. It's changed the way that we've built the tool internally. I think we've worked out most of the bugs around that. So if we had a 17.2 released for end of June, July, you can guess there'll be a 17.3 in the queue for this fall. I think open world-ish timeframes, although I'm still not legally allowed to tell you when the next version is going to come. But we expect to do quarterly updates. All right. So just an example of some incremental feature updates we included in 17.2. So there's a database 12c feature called sharding. We introduced a viewer for those customers so they can see how their shard systems are set up. They can see their regions and see how active those are. And we also delivered quite a few reports on that, and it also recognizes data guard environments. Or if you're just using the data guard broker for a regular database, whether that be sharded or not, you can use that as well. So you can see how many standbys you have. So you can get basically an overview picture of what that setup looks like, and then there's a whole set of reports available for that as well. There's not a data guard broker admin interface in SQL Developer 17.2. It's just a reporting to kind of show you what's going on type of interface. Okay, so let's get into the major bones of this presentation, and that's going to be take you through the major features, show you how the tool works, and maybe show you a few tips and tricks as we go. The tool is very deep, and I've spent the last 6 years posting 2 to 3 blogs a week trying to cover all the features, and I'm still not close to to getting there. I will say that the majority of people out there are using the tool for these 3 use cases. So there are PL SQL developers out there that use it to compile, debug, run, profile, document, and test their code. Maybe that's half the users, maybe it's 40%. Almost everyone is using it for an interactive kind of worksheet where they can write in queries and scripts and get the output back. And then everyone else is probably also using it as a graphical user interface for the database. So it's just clicking around into objects and seeing what's what and using the create and alter dialogues. Now, after we get past those things, I'd say about 20 to 30% of folks are using the reporting feature. I think it's one of the most powerful features in the tool, and maybe one of the most underutilized or least utilized features in the tool. So if you're looking to go from a everyday basic user to a power user, the reporting is a great way to make that leap, and I'll cover the reporting feature, of course, today. There's a fully functional design and modeling tool inside of SQL Developer. Now it's also available as a standalone product, Oracle SQL Developer Data Modeler, but the Data Modeler itself sits inside of SQL Developer, so you can create logical design, engineer that to a relational model, generate DDL scripts, push that into the database, and do all of your core design work. We have a database administration console. So we started delivering database administration features way back in version 3.0 of SQL Developer. I forget what year that was, 2011, 2010 is when we really started to ramp up the DBA features. So if you're a DBA and you've never used the DBA panel before, it really doubles the feature set in the tool, and it covers things like RMAN and data pump and what else is there? And security, storage administration, auditing, great interfaces for all of those things. If you're an Oracle customer currently running a Sybase or Teradata or DB2 or SQL Server or even an Oracle MySQL database, and you want to migrate that system to an Oracle database platform, we have a migration workbench, which is project-based inside the tool, or you can also easily copy objects from those third-party databases into an existing Oracle table or to new tables in an existing Oracle database. Migrations aren't something that folks do on a regular basis, but it becomes a very big deal when they need it. I'm not going to cover it in today's call just for lack of time. But if you have questions about migrations, I have 2 white papers out there I can refer you to. Just drop me a note and I'll send you the link. We've also made it much easier to REST enable your Oracle database with the Oracle REST Data Services or ORDS product inside of SQL Developer. You can actually install it, run it, and configure it all from SQL Developer instead of using the PL/SQL APIs that we have for ORDS. And you can also design and deploy your RESTful services with SQL Developer. And we have a whole lot more coming down the pipe for ORDS and REST enabling the database, which I'll cover in the webinar in 2 weeks. And for next week, I'll be covering the command line interface that we've added for SQL Developer, and that's Oracle SQLcl. Okay. So enough of the boring stuff. Let's get into the actual demo. The rest of these slides are just to help me stay on track, so I know what to talk about next. I'm going to switch over into the tool and do some live product demo. I think before we really cover the worksheet, again, I'm assuming that you're brand new to the tool. The first thing you're going to need to be able to do is create a database connection. So there are a whole slew of panels in the tool, and those are all accessible via this View menu. So I've got my Connections panel here. Now these panels can be docked. They can be hidden, you can group them, you can drag them around any which way you want. And as I pick up the mouse and start to move this around, you see that little orange area paint? When I let go, that's telling me where it's going to go. And it can be a little finicky, but if you're just patient, you can eventually generally get stuff to go where you want. If you ever screw this up and you can't get your desktop to come back to life, the easiest fix for that is to say Window, reset Windows to factory settings. Okay, this does not reformat the Windows operating system. All it does is it resets the window layout inside of SQL Developer. So this will work on a Mac and Linux as well. It's the equivalent of basically deleting the desktop's XML file in your config settings. Now your connection panel is going to be blank by default, and you're going to want to say right-click, create a new connection. Everything here is going to be blank as well. Your connection names can be anything you want. I do, however, recommend that you use a name that makes sense, because these names will come back to haunt you. So when you open a worksheet to start doing your coding, the names of those worksheets follow the name of the connection that they're associated with. And also, as you go to run a report or open up another screen, it's going to ask you what connection you want to use. So if you use silly names here, you're only hurting yourself. But this is completely arbitrary text. I can call it whatever. So I'm going to call it Webcast 101. So the username, that's your Oracle username. The password, that's your Oracle password. Now you can choose to save these if you want. All that means is we're not going to prompt you for it again. If you uncheck that, we're going to prompt you for the password the next time you restart the tool and try to connect. You can associate your connections with a color scheme. So if we see this little green outline around this worksheet is because this HR connection has a color scheme of green. So that's just a visual reminder saying, hey, I'm in a safe space maybe, or maybe I'm in a production type space, and maybe it will help you not make that truncate drop table boo-boo. Let's hope you never make that boo-boo, but it happens. You have several connection types to choose from. Basic says, look, I've got all the information I need to connect. I know where stuff is, I know what it's called, and I know how to get to it. So you don't have to mess with TNS names, you don't have to mess with LDAP or any of that. You simply provide the IP address or the server name on your network where the database is running, the port where the listener is listening for connections, and probably if you're on 12c and higher, you're going to use a service name. However, if on an older database, you're more than welcome to use the SID. Now, if you're an employee who's been given a TNS names file, or you manage your own TNS names file, you can use the TNS connection type. This does not require you to install anything on your machine. This works out of the box. You don't need an Oracle client. If we have a TNS file, and if we can find it, we'll drop down the list of TNS entries here. Now, some folks get stopped here because for some reason their connection drop-down does not show them anything. If that's the case, the places where we're looking for your file, there's no file there. But you can simply go into the database preferences box and click on advanced, I think. Yep. And you can supply an explicit, look, this is where the TNS names directory is. I don't have anything listed because my TNS names file is in my client network admin folder where we expect it to be. Oh, and where did we go from there?
I can learn to understand you much better if I can get familiar with the way you talk. I need your permission.
Hold on, folks. Let me mute people. Well, if you muted yourself, thank you.
To get familiar with the way you talk. I need your permission to help.
Come on. Mute all. Yep. Okay. What else do we need to talk about in here? You can have quite a few connections. Most customers I'll talk to will have as many as several hundred, if not 1,000 connections. I'm that rare person that only has 7 or 8 because I don't work in the real world like you folks do. So something you'll want to do is to logically group your connections into these folders. So I can select one or more of these, right click and say add to folder and call it webinars. And now I can quickly delve into these. Something we're working for in version 17.3 is to allow you to have nested groups of folders for your connections. So if you want even a finer level of ability to group connections, that's coming in a future release. Now, when you're ready to connect, all you need to do is expand this tree item, and we'll connect for you. I happen to be already connected to these 3 because that's what these little connection plugs mean. I'm not connected to this, so there's no plug. As I expand these trees, I'm given a list of types of objects in the schema for the user that's associated with the connection. So I logged in as HR. Under this top level node of the tree, I'm going to see the objects that are in the HR schema. So the collection of the HR schema is available on these nodes. So I've got tables in HR, views, and whatever else. Now, a lot of folks will come in and say, look, Jeff, I don't see my stuff. I know I can run something like this. But why can't I see DBA data files under tables or views? Because again, that object that you think is yours isn't really yours. There's either a public synonym or another synonym that makes it appear that object is in your account. So a bit of a trick. If you want to open a filter dialog on the tables, there is an option to say include objects which are synonyms in your list. Now, I don't know if that's going to pop up anything of interest here. maybe a few things. But we'll say, look, there's a synonym to this table. Your user has that synonym. We're just going to pretend to show that to you as a table, so you don't have to go hunt and peck for it. Your trees by default will be much deeper than mine. I'm hiding a bunch of stuff in my connection tree. So again, in the preferences, on the database node, there's something called navigation filter. You can enable this filter and turn off all of the types of things that you never work with. By default, we require you have at least one thing, and we always treat tables as the most important, so you'll see it up top. Now, if you want to go browse something in another schema, you have the other users node. So here are the list of all of the users in the database. Now I can filter that list if I want. If I want to go look to see what's in my Apex install and see its tables, I just navigate that tree several levels. If you're not fond of this kind of tree and nested tree navigational style, we have an alternative. You can right-click on a connection and ask for a Schema Browser. So you have a drop-down that shows a list of users, and below that, a drop-down a list of object types. So I could say Apex views, and here are those. And all of the same features here on the browser should be the same as available to you on the tree. All right, so we're connected. We're able to browse stuff. I want to start doing code. Now, when I opened this connection, two things happened. Obviously, the connection was established to the database. This tree expanded, but I also got a worksheet over here on the right, and I can start writing really anything that you would expect to be able to do in a database. So an individual statement, a PL SQL anonymous block. I could create objects. I can even run SQL plus scripts and commands over here in this worksheet. To execute a query, by default, it's mapped to Control-Enter on the keyboard. It's generally also mapped to F9. This gives me the output in the form of a grid. This is very boring, single cell, one by one. If we do something more interesting, I'm logged in as HR, so it's going to come into the employees table. So we grab by default the first 50 rows in the spreadsheet looking view. As I scroll down this grid, it will fetch more rows. So I've got 50, now it knows it's got 100. If it's a quite large table, I think you can do Control-End. Yeah, and it'll force a full fetch. So once we've got all of the records down, we'll tell you how long it took to get all of them and actually how many records there are. If you want a flat view like you would be used to seeing in SQL+, you can use F5, or you can use this button here. So this first button is the same as that Control-Enter, F9. This button says Run Script, which is mapped to F5. And it gives me this kind of paged row output down here at the bottom, what we'd be used to seeing. We support most, if not all, of the formatting SQL+ things. If you're familiar with SQL+, I can say set page size 100. Let's do 110. What else could we do here? Interesting. We'll clear the screen too. So the screen clears, and I was able to get all of the output under that single page. And if I wanted to write this to a file, I would simply use the spool command. Now you need to spool to a directory that the application and the user running the application has access to. So I could do something like users JD Smith stuff.csv. And I want CSV, so I'm also going to say set SQL format to CSV. And let's run that. So there's that CSV output. And if I did this right, I should be able to open this too. Don't make fun of me for using Notepad. It's just always there. So there's that CSV file. I could spend an entire day talking about this worksheet stuff, but I'm going to just try to cover the basics very quickly. Okay, so let's talk about Insight very quickly. These are the helper features. So I have mine turned on right now into automatic mode. After about 0.6 of a second, it's going to say, hey, based on what you've typed, we think this is what you're looking for, one of these things. And if I agree with it, I can simply click onto it and run the query. I can also ask for help on a column list. So up here, it makes sense to pick more than one column, so I can do that. And I could also say, where is not null, and hit Control Enter, and it's going to run that list. Not a very smart query, but I wasn't really paying attention to what I was doing. If you hate the automatic stuff, you can turn that off. Get into Preferences, this time on the Code Editor page, under Completion Insight. You can increase that delay so we're not so quick to put stuff in your face, or you can also just turn these completely off, and we never automatically show you the help. And all that means is when you want the help, you have to ask for it. So I can wait here the rest of the day. Nothing's going to happen. But as soon as I hit Control Spacebar, that's when the helpers pop up. And how helpful the helpers are depends on how smart you are. That's not helpful at all. That's more helpful. So the more type, the better the help's going to be. What do we want to talk about next? Let's talk about more what you can do other than just running. Oh, sorry, before we get to that. So the helpers. As you run queries, we remember them. So we have a query history. You can access them via the keyboard, and I'm using Control plus the up or the down arrow key to cycle through that list. As you do that, it clobbers the editor and puts in items from the history. Now, if you accidentally, let's say you have a lot of cool code in here, and you accidentally fat finger the history and you lose your code, just do undo, Control Z, and you'll get your code back. You can also hit F8, and you'll get a visual panel of your query history. And this is every query I've ever executed. And we remember the connection executed on, when you last executed it, and how much time in total has been spent executing this query from the client perspective, not the database time, but the client time. So here's a tip and trick for you. Let's say you're working on a project in the HR space. You say, look, I only want to see my IMP queries. So you put in this filter. It's going to hide anything that doesn't have IMP in the query text. And come back here and start running through the list, and we're going to only see our IMP items in the history. Just make sure you remember to clear that filter so you don't think you've lost queries. Okay, let's talk about some tuning features. Most folks have heard of Explain Plan before, and we have a GUI interface to that. You simply hit this button here, and it does the old standard Explain Plan, which may or may not be useful. I'm not a huge fan of it because the Explain Plan output is a theoretical display of the plan that the optimizer could use. I think something much more useful is to use a technology like Dbms Plan, which is a package that goes out and pulls the SQL ID plan in the data dictionary, the cached plan, and we have access to that too. So let me show you that. So instead of clicking this plan button here, right next to it, there's this little drop-down arrow, and what that does is it says, okay, look, we can guess what the SQL ID is. Looks like it's not in the cache, so let's run it to make sure it is. Yep. So now this SQL ID, the database is aware of it, and there's a plan computed for it. And there's just one plan, so there's just one SQL ID and plan number. So when I click this, I get the same plan I would see if I had run Dbms plan. This is the plan that's in the $v SQL plan view. So this is much more likely to be the plan that was used to execute that query that I just executed a few seconds ago. What you see in these plans is 100% dependent on, well, first of all, how good your statistics are and how fresh they are. But in terms of visualizing that data, where is the plan stuff? We have a search in here, by the way. Yep. So when you have a hard time finding stuff because your brain's shot, you can use the search to find things. So these are all of the columns that I could add to see my plans. So if you're like seeing the plan notes, you want to make sure you turn on the other XML branch column, and that's where things like plan notes appear. And you see them towards the bottom of the plan. Yeah, here. Dynamic sampling, yes. So if you don't want to see things like cost and object name, just go back there in the preferences and turn those on. Now SQL Plus has a feature called Autotrace, which runs a query, gets the plan for it, and also gets the execution stats. And we have a very similar feature to that in SQL Developer. Works almost the exact same way, and it's this button. So in addition to the plan, which should be the same as what we just looked at, I also have the plan stats. So these are the session statistics that were accumulated just as that query was executing. So we can see what's going on. There's quite a bit of stuff in here. A few tricks for Autotrace. If you want to force a different plan, maybe you don't agree with this nested loops decision by the data dictionary. When the database generates plans, it also includes hints that you can supply to your query to force a different path. So instead of nested loops, I want to use a hash join. So that inserts this hint into your query. Now I'm going to pin this Autotrace, and I'm going to run the Autotrace again. So now I have two Autotraces, and there should be a big difference. So I can right-click and say, let's compare that one Autotrace with the other Autotrace. And we can see side by side that there's a significant difference in how this query ran, not only in the plan, but in the metrics. In general, I say let the database come up with the plans. And if it's not coming up with good plans, it probably means your stats aren't good, and you need to go talk to your DBA about your statistics collection methods and maybe refresh those. Let's see, what else? Oh, Chris Axon on our developer advocacy team has a really nice blog post on how to use the compare feature in SQL Developer for plans and auto traces. But basically you need to pin the plan or pin the trace using these little buttons here. And all that means is when I run a new one, don't close it. And then once you find something you want to compare, right-click and say compare with what you want to compare with, and you'll get that side-by-side presentation. You can always right-click down here and say, hey, just close everything. And I want to close everything but this. Okay, let's check my cheat sheet. So we talked about the script engine, results to grid, query history, object completion, explain plan, didn't talk about formatter, didn't talk about visual query builder. If you're more of, if you're brand new to Oracle, and typing stuff like this is a little bit overwhelming or new to you, you can instead toggle over to query builder mode. Now it might bring up some bad memories that evoke the access days. But what that allows you to do is take this list of objects over here on the left and drag and drop them over here into the worksheet, and there would be checkboxes. Although my machine has decided at the moment to take a small break. So let's see what else we need to talk about. So we've got grammar checks in the formatter. Always have a backup. And I did not start my backup. Hey, when you're installing SQL Developer, you can have as many copies as you want. And I put them in program files, although in Windows that's not the probably the best place to put them. You can put them any place you want. And you have as many versions of SQL Developer installed as you want. So I could have 17.2 and 2.1 and 4.1 and 4.2 all over the place. When you go to do an upgrade, just make sure you put the install package down to a fresh directory. Don't use it to overwrite an existing install, because that's going to really screw things up and cause problems. Let's go back to the magic slide deck and see what's next. All right, so we'll talk about browsing the contents of your database. We've got about 20 minutes left. That should give me just enough time to cover that, the PL SQL features, and maybe reports. And I think that'll be a good 101. I'll continue to the top of the hour. I'll stop the recording, and I'll stay on for as long as folks want to hang out and ask questions. And you can ask me really anything you want. No, Query Builder decided to come back. That was nice of it. Yeah, so if I want employee ID, first name, last name, salary, as I check those, I get properties down here that I can set. Although did it not? You got to click hard apparently. So I can say criteria. I don't want everyone. I only want folks where salary is greater than 10,000. And maybe we want to sort this by salary. Yep. Helps if you click in the right place. So descending nulls last. Shouldn't have nulls on salary. If you do, that's not going to be fun. We could also sort by last name. Sort order 2. And as I click on the worksheet, you can see how that query was updated to give me what you want. So the query builder, it's not going to be a replacement for doing your day-to-day work, but it's a nice crutch, or it's at least a nice way to bootstrap yourself into the database so you can start teaching yourself SQL as you go. All right, so let's talk about working with stuff in your database using the GUI versus using a worksheet where you're kind of in charge. Let's go look at our employees table. So human resources is one of those sample schemas that the database used to ship with. It doesn't ship with those anymore. If you want to install them, you can go to the Oracle GitHub project and download the scripts to install these in your database. So there's human resources, sales history, order entry, and maybe 4 or 5 more out there. But if you just Google Oracle GitHub sample schemas, you'll find these. If you download our VirtualBox appliance on OTN with the database and SQL Developer all stood up, we've also installed these sample schemas for you. So when I double-clicked on employees, it opened the employees table, and here I've got all of the metadata and the data itself for this table. So metadata, I'm just saying the data that describes this object. So here's the column definition. Here's a list of constraints. And so this is a parent-child report. So if I click on imp hire date and in, it's just telling me this is a null constraint on the hire date column itself. If you're wondering what these little ponies are, that's a trick. I was kidding with someone online today. They wanted to show something funny for null values. So on the advanced page, display null value as, this is actually an emoji character, and I'm using a Unicode-friendly font, UI symbol. For most developers, that's going to be very painful because it's not fixed width. This is the font I normally use, Droid Sans Mono. And I'm going to change this is a null. Yep. So there we go on that. Of course, we have the data. And these object editors, you can do quite a few things with them just to make it easier to work with objects. So there's this little pen here. I'm going to push that. I'm going to open up a second table. So I've got departments and employees open at the same time. I want a side-by-side view of these. So I'm going to right-click and say, hey, I've got my list of document tabs here. I want to start a new document tab group. So I've got my departments table and my employees table, and I want to do a side-by-side data scroll. You might even want to do independent data scrolls of the same data in a single table. So you can also grab this little widget here and pull that down, and we'll clone the displayer or the viewer here. So I could do up here salary greater or less than 10,000, and down here I could say salary greater than 10,000. Of course, helps if you hit enter. That requeries the data and gets those records. I could also right-click on the document and say split, and get that same split, and then use the mouse, and then right-click, unsplit if you want. I could also say there's a lot going on with my employees table, like it's related to locations, which is related to regions, which is related to countries. I think I got that backwards. Locations goes to countries, then to regions. So I can visualize that if I click the Model tab. This will take a few seconds to initialize because I haven't opened it yet. This loads the Data Modeler extension that we ship with. So you're not going to get a full data modeling experience with this, but we will give you the relational diagram for these objects here. Now, if I want to turn this diagram into a model, I just have to click this button, and then you have the full design features available to you. I know most folks always like to be able to generate the SQL for their objects as well. Now, this uses Dbms Metadata, which is a package the database ships with, which is used in lots of different things, including data pump. But its job is to say, hey, how would we represent this object that's already in the database in a DDL script? Now you can shape the DDL that's output. I haven't ran this today in my database, so the first time you run this package, it's a wee bit slow, as we can see. So we've got things like indexes and storage, comments, triggers. You might not want all of that jazz. So again, shaped by preferences. And to find this one, it's a little tricky place. You go to Utilities, Export, and then you check off the things that you don't want. Or you add things, like I can add grants and refresh this. Now this should come back much faster the second time. Of course, my software and computer likes to make a liar of me. And at the bottom of the script, we would see any explicit grants on the table to other users and roles added. While it's doing that, let's get ready to talk code. So for you folks that do SQL, we've got support for all of your SQL types, including types. But I was thinking of packages, functions, procedures. I said type bodies. We also support addition-based redefinition, SQL objects, and I'm probably forgetting something, but they should all be here in the tree. And when you open one of these, it gives you a code editor. Now, by default, for some reason, we don't show line numbers, but if you want line numbers, just right-click and ask for those line numbers. You'll notice my code editor here looks completely different than my code editor here. That's set in the preferences. So my brain starts to bleed a little bit, not literally, but I just, I don't like looking at black text on a white background all day. So we ship with some schemes. We don't ship with this one. This scheme is available on GitHub. Someone spent a lot of time building a really nice looking scheme, and they made it available on GitHub, and you can just download that and import it into SQL Developer and use that, and that's what I'm using this one over here is a little bit closer to the default, although I have changed the font itself. So yep, so here's the grant select on to user homework. All right, let's get into the code. Oh, by the way, these tables, I always get this question, and the most popular blog post I've ever written is all about how to get data from Excel into your table. So we have a full wizard for that, and it also works for delimited text files. We also have the ability to edit these tables, so you can add partitions, add columns, grant privs to other users, and tons of right clicks. These grids have tons of right clicks too, and I could do an entire hour just demoing the data grid feature to you. Of course, I would be remiss if I did not let you know that you can also get your data out to Excel. If you have a stupid large table and you send it to Excel, we'll send as many rows as we can to a worksheet and then start a new worksheet. But I've done a 1,000,000 row export to Excel before. It just takes a few seconds. If you're on an older version of SQL Developer, the Excel exports can be a bit constrained by memory. And even if you're on the brand new version, if you choose this old school Excel format, it's going to be slow. Try to always aim for the XLSX for the best experience when exporting to Excel. Now, if you want it to be lickety-split fast, don't do Excel at all and go straight to CSV. All right, now let's talk about code. Now, when I demo to you PL/SQL stuff, I only ask that you don't look at my code and say, oh, that's how I should do code, because I am not the PL/SQL person. But I can show you the PL/SQL type features. Let us introduce a compilation error. So I did a compile. I got my errors down here on the bottom. I also have an indicator here in the right gutter of where the errors are. So if I have a very large program, it's got thousands of lines. Over here, I've basically got a map of where those errors are. And if I mouse over the little red icon on the map, it'll zoom in and show me where that error is. The parser is also trying to let me know there's an issue. So this isn't the database telling me this. The database is saying, or I'm sorry, SQL Developer itself is saying, hey, whoever's drawing on my screen, stop it, or I'm going to get mad and do mean stuff to you. Although that's a cool trick that you can draw on my screen. I got distracted. Oh, yes, I caused that error. Now, if I double click on the error, it takes me to the line and position, and it also reminds me of what the error was. I just fix my error, recompile, and the error message goes away. The errors that we show you are going to be based on your compiler settings, and that's on the database page, I think. PL/SQL compiler. I recommend you enable the database telling us when it thinks there's going to be an issue, either in the shape of a warning or in the shape of performance issues. And let's see if we find any here. So there's not a technical error here, but it's saying, hey, you might want to use the auth ID clause because we're defaulting to definer. And that's all about privileges, like who gets to, when you run this, do you inherit the privileges of the user that wrote the code, or are you using your own? If I got that backwards, apologies. But anyway, this is just giving me a warning. You can escalate warnings to physical errors, so it prevents compilation. But I don't know if I would go that far. Now there's a warning associated to this line, so it's highlighting that here for me. I need to go faster, running out of time. Everyone wants to know how to debug. So the first step to debugging, compile for debug. That adds overhead. And by overhead, I mean there's extra information in the database that's going to allow us to debug this program. If you connect to a production database and you see these little green overlays on your stored procedures, that means that debug information is there, and it could, not just theoretically, but actually slow down your programs. And you don't want to slow stuff down in production unless you're just feeling cranky and you want to mess with the developers that you support and you want to give them an easy fix later so you look like the hero. I'm not saying you should do that. You would probably get in trouble. Don't do that. So we're going to compile for debug, and then we're going to hit the bug button. So to debug something, we have to execute it. If my stored procedure here had, it's actually a function. If my function here had inputs, I would supply values for those inputs here, and it would change the anonymous block below. I say OK. It's going to start executing. It's going to invoke the debugger. It's going to open up a few extra panels, and it's going to run until it gets to a place where it can stop. I had a breakpoint in here. Now to add breakpoints, you simply click in the gutter to add these breakpoints. I had a breakpoint here. It ran until it stopped here. That's what this little red arrow means. It's telling me I'm sitting on line 6. That means every line up to line 6 has been executed. So I've got my call stack here, which is again telling me I'm on line 6 of my function. And I started out in this anonymous block. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Which is I can get back to as well. So what can I do inside the debugger? Hey, you may have noticed I'm wearing a different colored shirt. Well, it turns out yesterday during the webcast, I got a little confused as I hadn't demoed the debugger in a while, and I messed up. So I'm re-recording this section, and I'm going to show you what you can actually do with the debugger. So let's start our debug session. I've compiled for debug. I have a breakpoint set. I'm going to hit the bug button. I've got an input value set for my number in. And here we go. So here we are. I'm at this iteration of the loop, and I've got my SQL table, and I want to peek into that table. So let me get some room here. So I'm fetching data from this cursor into this SQL table. Called tab, and there's two ways we can peek into that. We can mouse over and extend in, and we also have down here on the data panel the same thing. So this is indexed by integer. Here's that value, or that index value, and then here's the actual SQL table values. Now if I step through that loop again, I can, oops, sorry. I can see I have 2 rows now, or the equivalent of 2 rows. And I can also mouse over this again. I think this is a couple, 2 extra mini mouse hovers, but it's more probably user-friendly if you're looking at a much simpler variable. But it works either way. Now, what I'd like to do with the debugger is actually change things. Yep. So I could actually change the value of that variable mid-execution. So it's really nice for what-if scenarios. Now I could continue stepping through this. I could say just keep executing till we get to the end, or I can be very lazy and say, you know what, I've seen what I need to see. Let's get out of here. So I just hit the terminate button. And that's the debugger. Let's talk about reports. So reports is reports. Reports is one of those default panels that we have in the tool. We ship a bunch of reports out of the box. So just simple things like, hey, tell me what's going on in the database. So you associate a connection to it, we run a predefined query, and we bring you data back. User-defined reports are ways for you to take those queries that you run over and over and over again, and you want to be able to parameterize those and run those on demand, for example. And these reports can be grid-based, they can be HTML, they can be all kinds of cool stuff. So I tried to run that report on a database where the data wasn't there. So here we go. So here's a parent-child report. And what I mean by that is, as I click on data up here, the bottom report will refresh with data from that range of time. And to define a report, you give it at least one query, and you can have as many child reports as you want, and you can pull those two values together by using a bind notation. So I've got this bind kind of syntax, uppercase year, and what that tells SQL Developer is when I select this value here, which is going to be 2017, it's going to feed it to this query below, and that's how it's able to paint this grid on the bottom. Now you can share reports, you can export your reports, and you can load other people's reports. And there's some really cool reports out there that folks have built, and I would not say that the ones that I have built are really cool. But people have built heat maps to show like frequent log switches, and here's just kind of a more boring one, but maybe more useful. So top SQL by weight. And here's just a grid-on-grid report, but it's got lots of child reports available. And I can even have it fire off the SQL Tuning Advisor if I want, assuming it's licensed. Okay, so let me go check the questions real quick. I know there was at least one. Someone wanted to know if they could see a list of tables that only had a column of a specific name. And yeah, there is a way to do that. So if you want to browse your database based on objects that have a column in it, click the binoculars button, search on column, tell us what schemas you want. And I'm going to look for tables that have a column. What do we want to look for? Something that's going to be found. Employee ID. And what we'll get back is a list of entries, and it'll serve as a browser. And I can click into these objects. Did I tell it to go into code as well? Yeah. So don't search my code. That's why it took longer than I thought it would. Yep. So here's every object in the database with a column of employee ID. And as I click on one of these, it'll go open that object for me. Or did I have to click here? Yep. So here's that materialized view with that employee ID column in it. So thanks for the person who asked that question. I'm going to turn the recording off and then invite folks